On July 30th, 2001, around 7 p.m., Chaos at Michigan's Adventure Amusement Park was operating normally. The ride was loaded with 33 riders. All seats were then checked by the single operator working the ride. The ride was started and began its normal ride cycle. As the ride completed its lifting and was completing its tilt towards the ground, the sweep carousel, which held all rider vehicles, detached from its hub. This caused the entire wheel to drop several feet to the ground, rolling slightly before resting against the raised lifting arm. The ride operator emergency stopped the ride. It would then take several hours for first responders to be able to remove all riders from the ride due to a fear that a change in weight would cause the ride to fall. In all, 31 of the 33 riders were injured, but all did eventually recover. The evacuation process took between 5 and 9 hours to complete. The investigation into the accident would begin immediately, with the Michigan Department of Consumer and Industry Services arriving and disassembling the ride. The park had added the ride in 1996, and the ride was the very popular Chaos model by American manufacturer Chance Rides. Chance Rides would issue a stop operation order for all Chaos rides immediately following the incident. The ride was essentially an upgraded take on an Enterprise-style ride, featuring a main lifting arm attached to a sweep carousel. At the ends of each sweep on the carousel sat the 18 rider vehicles. Each vehicle sat 2 riders facing outwards with over-the-shoulder restraints. Each vehicle could also tilt and swing on its own axis, causing flipping and rotating motions as the ride operated. The entire sweep carousel could also tilt on its own axis, allowing it to spin on the Z or Y axis while the ride's main lifting arm was raised. Each rider vehicle could seat 2 riders using over-the-shoulder restraints as well as leg guards that ensured that riders' bodies were fully enclosed within the vehicles at all times. The park itself had just undergone a sale to Cedar Fair. When the ride was added to the park was family-owned. Throughout the 1990s, the park had undergone a period of rapid investment and growth. The Chaos was one of many rides added by the family prior to their sale of the park. At the time of the accident, Cedar Fair had been owners of the park for only a few months, and most operational procedures were left over from the park's family ownership. While the report from state investigators would never be released publicly, a service bulletin was released by Chance for all Chaos rides just 4 days after the accident on August 3, 2001. The content of this service bulletin has served as the basis for this video. The service bulletin was required to be completed prior to any Chaos ride being put back into operation following the stop operation order issued after the incident. It required a detailed check and replacement of the hub cap screws on the ride. The Chaos featured 28 such screws of different sizes depending on the exact serial number of the ride. They had found that in some cases, improper sized screws, or screws of the wrong grade of steel, had been used. This could result in the screw bending or breaking. They had also found cases where the screws were loose, resulting in damage to the tapped holes for the screws. They required that all Chaos owners remove all screws and replace them with ones in spec for their specific serial number and of the correct grade. They required grade 8 steel to be used. Chance had changed the design of the bearing that the hub of the ride seated to around 1997, going from a blind hole where the screw was covered and not visible from the other side of the bearing to a through hole that ran the entire way through the bearing. The newer through hole design would require longer screws than a blind hole. Additionally, some of their rides had hub gussets, steel plates on top of the hub added for extra support. These rides would also need slightly longer screws than the original design. It's not known what exact version of the ride was installed at Michigan's Adventure, but as the ride was one of the first examples ever installed, it can be reasonably assumed that the ride was likely the blind hole and likely no gusset design. The service bulletin also required checking for the proper tapped hole size on the ride and ensuring that it was up to spec. If it was out of spec due to movement of the screws due to improper size or torque, the bearing would need to be replaced. The bulletin went on to say that after the screws and corresponding washers were replaced, they should be torqued to 90 foot-pounds and have Loctite applied. Then the screws would be required by the bulletin to be checked for proper torque at least once per month during operation. The difference in parts from the time that the ride was installed could have resulted in screws that were too long or not proper being used. These would have then bent and broke during the accident. The evacuation process for the ride after the accident is also worth examining. The emergency action plan in place at the park at the time was put in place by the park's family owners. It did not include rehearsing for problems like what occurred in this situation, and included very limited cooperation with local emergency response teams. Accordingly, once the accident occurred, the response was hindered by a lack of preparedness from these teams. There was significant concerns regarding the change in weight on the sweep carousel as riders were being removed, causing the entire disc to fall to the ground. Accordingly, the park wanted to set up a crane to secure the carousel before removing riders. This had never been done before, so the completion of this took some time, resulting in an even slower evacuation. Placement of the crane was undoubtedly a good idea, but the fact that nothing like this had been done before and that first responders were not familiar with the ride or park meant that the response was slower than would be ideal. This ultimately resulted in some riders being trapped for upwards of 5 hours. Thankfully, all riders were eventually evacuated from the ride and most only had minor injuries. 2 riders were more seriously injured but eventually made a recovery. With the full extent of this information uncovered, we can now reconstruct the events of the accident. On July 30th, 2001, Chaos at Michigan's Adventure was operating normally. Around 7 p.m., 33 riders were loaded into the ride and their restraints were lowered and checked by the operator. The ride was then started and began its pre-programmed cycle. As the ride reached its max lifting angle and was tilted nearly parallel to the lifting arm, the hub bolts, likely too small or too loose, began to give way. As one bolt bent and broke, others soon followed. This eventually caused all of them to completely fail. The sweep carousel then detached from the hub and fell to the ground. As it was spinning, it rolled slightly before resting on the extended lifting arm. The operator e-stopped the ride, leaving the lifting arm up. Park teams and first responders rushed to the ride, but the evacuation process would be hindered by a lack of communication and preparation for such a situation. Eventually, the sweep carousel would be secured by a crane and riders would eventually be removed from the ride. The accident marked a lot of changes for many aspects of the industry. For one, it caused Cedar Fair to revise their incident response plan at the park, bringing it in line with their other parks to include things like mock incidents and incident rehearsals with preparation from local first responders. This process is still done today at most major parks. It usually includes a simulated incident occurring inside the park or on a ride, with park officials, local law enforcement, and first responders rehearsing how they would respond to such an incident. This incident also marked a loss in momentum for Chance with the Chaos model. The ride had exploded in popularity in the late 90s, but the ride would see declining sales immediately after this incident, later being discontinued around 2004. Today, all Chance Chaos rides have now closed forever. The installation at Michigan's Adventure would never reopen and would be scrapped before the start of the 2002 season. All in, the accident has largely been forgotten today, likely thanks to the fact that many of the riders' injuries were thankfully not serious. However, the same cannot be said for many of the lessons learned from the accident, as today parks are much more prepared for strange evacuations and other unusual situations than they were at the time of this accident. While this incident is mostly forgotten today, it remains a strange footnote in amusement ride history that continues to have an impact on the industry. Thanks for watching this video. As always, if you'd like to read the full service bulletin or other sources used for this video, they are linked below. Additionally, accident reports from all my videos on my channel can be found for free on my website, along with other ride safety information. As always, thanks for watching this episode of What Really Happened, and I will see you next time.